Chair recognizes Representative Stacey Evans to speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise in support of SR 287. I have learned, sometimes the hard way, that it is so much easier to knock something down than it is to build something up. Many of you know that I grew up in Ringgold, and that parts of my hometown are still struggling to rebuild after many years after a devastating tornado. My family knows that you can easily knock something down. It takes seconds. But it's hard, very hard, to build something up or to implement change. I know this personally from my own life. It's hard to go down a new road. I did that when I walked down the road or across the state to Athens, Georgia, to attend the University of Georgia and to graduate. The first time anybody in my family had ever done that. That was hard. That was hard. That was different. That was change. We have an amendment before us. It's imperfect, but it's a very good measure. The measure represents, in my mind, a first step in a much-needed process of educational reform that will take years to implement. There are those among you that I know are dead set in voting against this idea. I've heard your concerns, and I will not pretend that your concerns are invalid. They're not. I just do not believe that these concerns are enough to stop us from taking this bold and very important step toward improving education in this state, towards change, towards progress. No one is wrong to think that maybe if we wait, we could make this bill better. Or that maybe if we wait for schools to work some of the new options that we've given them, things will get better. You're right, some of you, that the measure doesn't answer every question that we have about how every individual school situation will be handled. It gives the governor a lot of power. Some would say too much power. And it might not work. It might not. It might work for some schools, and it might work for some schools and not others. These are all reasons that I've heard for voting against this amendment. But just as there is not one silver bullet that can fix our education woes, I don't believe that these critiques are as cut and dried as they seem at first glance. And so just as many of you have asked me to reconsider my stance in favor of this amendment, if you're planning to vote no, I ask you to do the same. Going over some of these reasons that I've heard for voting against. True, it's not perfect, and we may be able to make it better, but we might not. And if we wait, students will sit longer in schools that are failing them. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'm not the first one to say it, but perfect is not the enemy of the good, and we can't let it be. How long can we wait? How much time? Parents all across this state are waiting. They're not waiting on political heroes. They're not waiting on high-minded adversarial discussions. Parents participating in the process of bettering schools all across our state are not seeing the results they deserve. Despite their hours of efforts, they feel like their hands are tied. They're ready for us to start the disruptive process of reform. We are simply sitting on the shore watching kids drown, debating over whether we should throw them a line or buy them a boat. And while I'm sure there's a debate to be had over the various lakeside life-saving techniques, we ain't got time for that, y'all. We have to help children today. It's our job today. It is true that some schools may be in the midst of implementing one of the new flexibility options we've made available to them, and if given more time, they may make it off the list. But they might not. An inclusion on the qualifying list doesn't mean that the OSD will include the school. Remember that. Just because they're on the list, they're not all going to go in the first year. They're not even all going to go in the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth, and they may not go ever. And they can only take a limited number of schools in any given year. And I have trust in good old-fashioned Georgia common sense that if a school is on the verge of passing the line to being non-qualifying on the list, that the OSD will not try to include that school. And in fact, I read the enabling legislation to instruct the OSD to consider recent performance of a school in deciding which school they're going to take. And the bottom line is we know that not all schools are making this progress, so why should we hold up the entire process because some schools are making strides when others are not? The OSD superintendent and governance advisors will no doubt look at the individual situations before they make their decision of which schools to include. They would be foolish not to. While it's true that the amendment doesn't answer every question about how every individual situation will be handled, it simply can't, and it shouldn't. If any school needs flexibility, it's a school that's experiencing challenges that are so great that they end up on this list in the first place. Flexibility of those that go into these schools to make change must be high. It's true that this amendment gives the governor a lot of power, but with great power comes great responsibility. And for those concerned that the power that the governor has under this measure goes too far, remember this. There is nothing about this legislation that provides any more power to the governor than he has now, unless a school is failing students of this state. Local communities will have at least 3 years, and most will have a lot longer than that, to raise their performance before a school would even be qualified to be a part of OSD, to even be considered. And if they can't make it off the list, if they cannot, and the school is taken over, the governor won't have any excuse. Should these schools continue to fail, it's not on the principals, the teachers, or the students, it's on the governor. That's the burden of leadership. But I'll say this, and it's important, as long as this body exists, the governor does not have the sole power over the OSD superintendent. Yesterday, a former colleague of ours said, and in a different context, but equally applicable here, he said, "To the minority, I urge you to work with the majority. To my colleagues in the majority, you have the burden of governing, so do it cautiously and do it well." While I agree with this sentiment, the burden is not simply on the majority. It's a shared burden. And so, yes, the OSD superintendent may report to the governor, but it's on us, both majority and minority, who are able to restructure the enabling legislation when and if necessary for as long as we are elected to this great body. And so it's on us too. I disagree with those that are concerned that the amendment is so broad that a governor could deem any school failing and take it over. First, I believe any governor that sought to pass legislation to deem all schools failing would not find favor in the legislature. And second, I don't believe any governor in his or her right mind would do such a thing. And we cannot check our common sense at the door. True, sometimes the schools are not performing well for reasons that are outside the control of their locals, or the teachers for that matter. But many times that isn't the case. And sometimes a new set of eyes can do wonders to come up with potential solutions to a problem, and that's what this measure allows. And if the problem is truly beyond administration and truly beyond teachers, then I say to the locals, wouldn't it be nice for you to be able to say to the governor or the OSD superintendent, "Welcome to my world," for the state to have to feel the pain that the locals feel. Once the OSD takes over, the continued failure of a school is on the OSD, it's on the governor. They will have every incentive to see the truth as it is and take steps to fix it. And if they can't, because governance doesn't matter, they will have every incentive to report back and make sure that more resources or the tools that are needed get to where they need to get to. I'm almost finished here. This is going longer than I thought it might. There's a lot to say. It's true that this bill might only work for some schools and not others, but it simply cannot be that the inability to help everyone is an excuse for refusing to help anyone. And finally, let's be honest, as I started, building something new is hard. That's something that I understand personally. It's something that my hometown understands, and I think it's something that everyone in here understands. And again, it might not work. I've said that. It might not. And if it doesn't, we're going to have to figure out how to fix it. We don't have the luxury of not. But we have to start fixing somewhere. What it's not okay to do is to give up. What is not right is washing our hands. I will not go back to my district. I will not go back to my hometown and say, turns out everything's okay, or we're just going to kick this can down the road a little bit longer, when I know that everything is not okay and we can't afford to wait. We know that for sure what we are doing right now as we sit here is not working, and we owe it to those kids and their parents that are stuck in their failing schools to try to fix it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.